What if the moment you close your eyes, something watches, something waits? You're paralyzed, trapped in your own body, helpless as shadows creep closer. Whispers call your name and cold fingers brush against your skin. You tell yourself it's just a dream, but the bruises, the scratches, the chilling memories, it's all too real. From childhood bedrooms that conceal sinister secrets to mirrors that show more than just your reflection. From haunting lullabies that refuse to stop to unseen roommates who won't leave. These are 5 terrifying sleep paralysis stories that feel too real. Each tale takes you deeper into a nightmare where the line between dream and reality disappears, leaving you with one question. What happens when you're awake, but the nightmare doesn't end? Do you dare face the truth, or will you lie frozen, praying the thing in the dark doesn't notice you? Turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself. These stories may haunt your waking hours too. Story 1. The shadow at the foot of the bed. I woke up to the sound of my name being whispered. The room was empty, or so I thought. My body felt heavy, pinned against the mattress, as though invisible chains held me down. Sleep paralysis. It wasn't my first time experiencing it, but this was different. I didn't just feel trapped, I felt watched. The whisper came again, soft but clear. John. The way it curled around the syllables of my name was unnerving, as though whoever or whatever was saying it knew me intimately. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that it was a remnant of a dream I couldn't quite remember. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something was in the room with me. My eyes scanned the shadows in my room, straining to adjust to the dim light spilling in from the street lamp outside. The glow outlined my desk, my dresser, the half-open closet door. Everything seemed normal until my gaze landed on the foot of my bed. It was there, standing perfectly still. The figure was tall and impossibly thin, blending seamlessly into the darkness of the room, yet somehow darker than the shadows around it. Its shape was barely human, its arms too long, its body unnaturally stretched. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but the weight of its presence pressed down on me like a physical force. The air grew cold, biting at my skin. My breath came out in short, visible puffs. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was just my brain misfiring during sleep paralysis. But then it moved. The figure shifted slightly, swaying as if caught in an unseen wind. A sound escaped me, a strangled gasp that barely registered in the oppressive silence. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm that seemed to echo in my ears, and then it started to approach. The way it moved was wrong, jerky and unnatural, like it was being dragged forward by invisible strings. It stopped at the edge of my bed, leaning in slightly as though studying me. I tried to scream, to thrash, to do anything, but my body refused to obey. Its face, or what I thought was its face, was a void, an absence of features that seemed to swallow the faint light around it. But I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, boring into me. Then it spoke. "You're mine now." The voice was low and guttural, layered with a strange echo that made my skin crawl. It didn't sound human, but there was something disturbingly familiar about it, like I'd heard it before in a dream or a nightmare. The figure reached out a long, shadowy hand, its fingers unnaturally thin and claw-like. As it hovered over my chest, I felt an unbearable pressure. My lungs burned, each breath a battle, and my vision began to blur. I wanted to close my eyes to shut out the nightmare unfolding before me, but I couldn't. I was a prisoner in my own body, forced to watch as this thing loomed closer. The whisper came again, louder this time. "You can't run, you can't hide." Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, something broke the tension. A sound, faint but distinct, coming from outside. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. The shadow froze, its head snapping toward the sound. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like something was demanding to be let in. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Whatever was out there might scare this thing away. The shadow straightened, its body elongating unnaturally as it turned toward the window. I could feel the pressure on my chest easing, and I managed to suck in a shaky breath. But my relief was short-lived. The tapping stopped. The shadow seemed to hesitate, as if weighing its options. Then, with a speed that made my stomach drop, it darted toward the window and melted into the darkness outside. I lay there, paralyzed and trembling, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Slowly, the grip of sleep paralysis began to loosen. I could move again, but I didn't dare get out of bed. The room was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. I forced myself to stay awake until dawn, too terrified to risk falling back asleep. When the sun finally rose, I convinced myself it had been nothing more than a vivid nightmare. But as I got up to start my day, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. There were bruises on my chest. The marks were faint but unmistakable, dark impressions of long, thin fingers. Over the next few days, I tried to shake the memory of that night. I avoided looking at the window after dark, kept the lights on in every room, and played music to drown out the silence. It worked, for a while. But then it happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to move. This time, the room felt even colder and the shadows seemed to writhe and shift on their own. I braced myself, expecting to see the figure at the foot of my bed. It wasn't there. It was standing right beside me. I could feel its icy breath against my ear as it whispered, "You can't escape me." My heart stopped. I could see it clearly now, its grotesque form towering over me, its clawed hand reaching out once more. The pressure returned, crushing and suffocating, and I thought for sure this was the end. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. I woke up the next morning drenched in sweat, my body sore and aching. The bruises were worse this time, deeper and more pronounced. I don't know what that thing was or why it targeted me, but one thing is certain, it's not finished with me yet. Every night since, I've been afraid to sleep, knowing that the shadow could return at any moment. And if it does, I'm not sure I'll survive another encounter. Story 2. The Lullaby That Never Ended. It started as a faint hum, almost soothing, until I realized it wasn't coming from inside the house. I woke up in the middle of the night, completely immobilized. The familiar, suffocating weight of sleep paralysis held me down. I was no stranger to it. This wasn't my first experience, but that night it felt different. It wasn't just the usual fear of being trapped in my own body. This time there was something else, a sound. At first it was barely perceptible, a gentle hum that seemed to float in the air. For a fleeting moment I thought it was a song I'd heard as a child, a lullaby my grandmother used to sing when I couldn't sleep. But as I listened more closely, I realized it wasn't the same. This melody was off, slower, deeper, and unsettlingly hypnotic, and it wasn't coming from within the room. The sound seemed to drift in from outside, just beyond my bedroom window. My room was on the second floor, so there was no logical way anyone could be out there. Still, the lullaby grew louder, clearer. Then I noticed something. The melody wasn't just random humming, it had words, faint and garbled at first, but as the sound grew stronger, I began to make them out. They weren't in a language I recognized. The voice was soft and feminine, but there was something wrong with it, something too perfect, like it wasn't quite human. I wanted to sit up, to pull the blankets over my head and block out the sound, but my body wouldn't move. My arms felt like they were glued to the mattress, and my head was locked in place, facing the window. That's when I saw her. A figure appeared outside the window, bathed in the faint glow of the streetlight. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a woman. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her hair hung in long, damp strands that clung to her face and shoulders. Her lips moved in time with the lullaby. She wasn't just outside, she was staring directly at me. The woman's eyes were the worst part. They were wide and unblinking, with irises so dark they almost blended into the pupils. They seemed to pierce straight through me, as if she could see into my soul. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt constricted, like invisible hands were wrapped around it. The lullaby continued, the melody twisting into something more discordant, more menacing. The words grew sharper, cutting into the stillness of the room like knives. Then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, it was too wide, too forced, like her face was stretching beyond its limits. Her teeth were jagged, uneven, and stained a sickly yellow. The sight of them made my stomach churn. She pressed her hands against the glass, her fingers long and thin, with nails that looked more like claws. The window began to creak under the pressure, and I feared it might shatter. The lullaby stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Her lips were still moving, but no sound came out. Then she spoke. "Let me in." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was sharp and grating, as if it came from somewhere deep within her. It echoed in my ears, bouncing around my skull until I thought I might go mad. I tried to look away, to close my eyes and block her out, but I couldn't. My gaze was locked on her, as if she were pulling me in with an invisible force. "Let me in," she repeated, her tone more insistent. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows in the corners stretching and writhing like living things. The air became heavy, almost suffocating, and the faint scent of decay filled my nostrils. I wanted to cry out, to beg her to leave, but the words wouldn't come. Suddenly, her head snapped to the side, and she let out a shrill, bone-chilling laugh. It was a sound I'll never forget, high-pitched and guttural, like the distorted cackle of a broken doll. She pressed her face closer to the glass, her breath fogging up the window. Then she began to scratch. Her nails dragged against the glass with a slow, deliberate motion, leaving deep, jagged marks. The sound was unbearable, a screech that set my teeth on edge. The scratching grew more frenzied, and I could see the glass starting to crack. "Let me in," she hissed again, her voice dripping with malice. I felt tears streaming down my face, though I couldn't move to wipe them away. My chest heaved with the effort of trying to breathe, but it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The scratching ceased, and the woman pulled away from the window. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of cold, unrelenting anger. For a moment she simply stood there, staring at me. Then she turned and disappeared into the darkness. The weight lifted from my body, and I bolted upright, gasping for air. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by sleep paralysis. But when I approached the window, my stomach dropped. The glass was covered in scratches. Deep, jagged lines crisscrossed the surface, proof that what I had seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. That night, as I lay in bed, the lullaby returned. This time, it wasn't outside, it was inside the room. The soft, haunting melody drifted through the air, coming from the corner of the room where the shadows were darkest. And then I saw her again. She was standing in the corner, her pale face glowing faintly in the darkness. Her smile returned, wider and more sinister than before. "Let me in," she whispered. I don't remember what happened next. I must have passed out, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I moved out of that house a week later, but sometimes in the dead of night. I still hear the lullaby, and I know she's waiting. Story 3, Trapped in My Childhood Room. I hadn't slept in my childhood bedroom for years, but that night, something felt wrong the moment I walked in. It wasn't just the stale air or the faint, musty smell of a room that had been unused for years. There was a heaviness, an oppressive stillness that seemed to settle over me like a weight. I brushed it off as nostalgia mixed with fatigue. My parents had insisted I stay the night after visiting for dinner, and my old room was the only option. The furniture was exactly how I'd left it. The same twin bed, the worn dresser, and the creaky wooden desk where I'd spent countless nights doing homework. Even the posters of bands I no longer listened to were still taped to the walls, their colors faded with age. I crawled into bed, exhausted, and pulled the familiar quilt over me. The fabric felt oddly cold against my skin, as if it had been sitting in a freezer. I ignored the discomfort, closing my eyes and letting the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan lull me into a restless sleep. Hours later, I woke up abruptly. The first thing I noticed was that I couldn't move. My arms were pinned to my sides and my legs felt like they were glued to the mattress. I tried to lift my head, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I realized I was completely paralyzed. The room was eerily quiet. The hum of the ceiling fan had stopped and the air felt stagnant. My eyes darted around, the only part of me I could control. The faint moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the room just enough for me to make out familiar shapes. The dresser, the desk, the closet door slightly ajar. And then I saw it. A shadow in the far corner of the room, near the closet. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the moonlight, a dark patch where the light didn't quite reach. But as I stared, the shadow began to shift. It was subtle at first, like it was swaying ever so slightly. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. The shadow moved again, this time more deliberately. It stretched upward, growing taller and more defined. It took the shape of a figure, tall, thin, with limbs that were just a little too long. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but my throat refused to cooperate. The figure stepped forward, its movements unnaturally slow and jerky, like it was adjusting to being in this world. As it moved closer, I could make out more details. Its face was a void, a featureless expanse of darkness that seemed to draw the light out of the room. The closer it came, the colder the air grew, until I could see my breath forming in faint white puffs. It stopped at the foot of my bed, towering over me. The weight on my chest grew unbearable, as if the air itself was conspiring to suffocate me. The figure didn't speak, but I could feel its presence pressing down on me, an overwhelming sense of dread that made my skin crawl. Then it tilted its head, as if studying me. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement near the closet. Another shadow. This one was smaller, crouched low to the ground, but just as unsettling. It crawled forward on all fours, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. My mind raced, grasping for any logical explanation, but there was none. These things weren't human. They weren't real. They couldn't be. The smaller figure reached the side of the bed and stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then it reached out a long, spindly hand and brushed its fingers against my arm. The touch was ice cold, sending a jolt of electricity through me. My breath hitched, and tears streamed down my face. The tall figure leaned in closer, its featureless face just inches from mine. A low, guttural sound rumbled through the room, a noise that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't a growl, it was almost like laughter, distorted and inhuman. Suddenly, the smaller figure climbed onto the bed. The mattress dipped under its weight, and I could feel its cold, claw-like fingers wrapping around my wrist. The pressure was unbearable, and I was certain it was going to drag me away, into whatever darkness it had come from. Then the tall figure raised a hand. The smaller figure froze, its grip loosening. The tall one tilted its head again, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. After a moment, it turned and pointed to the closet. The smaller figure slithered back into the shadows, disappearing into the dark void of the open closet. The tall figure lingered for a moment longer, its featureless face still hovering inches from mine. Then it straightened and stepped back into the corner of the room. Slowly, it melted into the shadows, its form dissolving until there was nothing left. The weight lifted from my body and I gasped for air, my chest heaving as I regained control. My limbs felt weak, shaky, but I forced myself to sit up. The room was quiet again, the hum of the ceiling fan returning as if nothing had happened. I looked around, half expecting to see the shadows lurking in the corners, but the room appeared normal. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, but as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, I froze. My arm was covered in faint, bluish marks, fingerprints. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning finally came, I packed my things and left, without telling my parents what had happened. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I called my mom, trying to casually bring up the room. When I asked her if anything strange had ever happened there, her voice grew quiet. She hesitated before answering. "There was something, years ago," she said finally. "The man who lived here before us, he lost his son. The boy disappeared one night. They never found him." I felt my stomach drop. "They always said he disappeared from that room," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. I haven't been back to my childhood home since, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up in my new apartment, unable to move, and I swear I can feel cold fingers brushing against my arm. Story 4: The Stranger in the Mirror. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just my reflection, until it moved on its own. It was a Thursday night, one of those long, uneventful evenings where the minutes seemed to stretch forever. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, half asleep and counting down the moments until I could collapse into bed. The bathroom mirror, streaked with water spots, reflected my tired face and dimly lit surroundings. I turned away for a second to grab a towel, and when I looked back, my reflection hadn't moved. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. My reflection's head was still tilted at the same angle, even though I had straightened up. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I leaned closer, squinting at the glass, and then it blinked. I hadn't blinked. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I froze in place. My reflection stared back at me, unblinking, with eyes that seemed darker than they should have been. My heart raced, thudding painfully in my chest, but I couldn't look away. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overtired and needed sleep. Forcing a laugh, I backed out of the bathroom and closed the door. That should have been the end of it. But things only got worse. The next morning, I avoided the bathroom mirror entirely. I brushed my teeth quickly, staring down at the sink, and only glanced at my reflection briefly before heading to work. Everything seemed normal in the daylight, and I began to convince myself that what I'd seen was nothing more than a half-dream, the product of exhaustion and dim lighting. But that night, as I washed up before bed, I couldn't resist checking the mirror again. At first, it was fine, just my reflection mimicking my movements as it always had. I smiled nervously, raising a hand and waving at myself. The reflection waved back. Normal. Then I turned to grab my toothbrush. When I turned back, my reflection was still smiling. Not a polite, fleeting smile like the one I'd given it. This smile was different, wider, too wide. It stretched unnaturally across my face, showing more teeth than any smile should. The air in the bathroom seemed to grow heavier, colder. I backed away from the mirror, but my reflection didn't move. It stayed there, grinning at me with that grotesque, unsettling smile. And then it stepped forward. The glass rippled like water as my reflection leaned closer, its movements slow and deliberate. Its eyes, my eyes, were voids. black pits that seemed to absorb the dim light of the room. I stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking, my breathing ragged. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers over my head, too scared to move. The next few nights were the same. I avoided the mirror at all costs, but every time I caught even a fleeting glance, I saw it. The distorted version of myself, always smiling, always watching. One night, I tried to cover the mirror. I grabbed an old sheet and taped it over the glass, determined to block out whatever was in there. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. But that relief didn't last. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint noise. It sounded like tapping, soft but persistent. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, but as I lay there listening, I realized it was coming from the bathroom. I forced myself out of bed, my heart pounding. The bathroom door was ajar, and the faint tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I stepped closer, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. The sheet I had taped over the mirror was on the floor. The tapping was coming from the glass itself. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the mirror. The surface was dark, almost black, but as I watched, something began to take shape. A hand pressed against the inside of the glass, its fingers long and unnaturally thin. The hand slid down the glass, leaving streaks that looked like condensation, even though the air was dry. Then, a face appeared. My face. But it wasn't me. The reflection's grin was impossibly wide, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. It pressed its palms against the glass and began to push, the surface rippling as if it were trying to break through. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. The reflection's laughter echoed through the bathroom, distorted and inhuman. It sounded like a dozen voices layered over one another, mocking and cruel. "Let me out," it whispered. I scrambled to my feet and slammed the bathroom door shut. The laughter stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I called a friend, desperate for someone to talk to. I didn't tell them everything. How could I? Instead, I asked if they'd ever heard of anything strange happening with mirrors. My friend hesitated before answering. "There's an old superstition," they said finally. "They say mirrors are portals. You're not just seeing your reflection, you're looking into another world." I laughed it off, but their words stayed with me. That night, I avoided the bathroom entirely, brushing my teeth in the kitchen and refusing to so much as glance at any reflective surface. It didn't help. Around midnight, I heard the tapping again. This time, it wasn't coming from the bathroom. It was coming from the mirror in my bedroom. I turned slowly, my blood running cold. The mirror was small, mounted above my dresser. The surface was dark, but as I watched, the distorted version of myself began to take shape. "You can't hide," it whispered. The reflection raised a hand, pressing it against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled, and I realized with growing horror that the hand was pushing through. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, shards flying across the room. For a moment, everything was still. Then I heard laughter. It wasn't coming from the broken mirror, it was coming from the bathroom. The door creaked open slowly, and the laughter grew louder, echoing in the darkened hallway. I ran out of the house, not stopping until I was in my car with the engine running. I stayed with a friend that night, too scared to go back. When I finally worked up the courage to return home, I found the bathroom mirror perfectly intact. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, late at night, I hear faint tapping. I don't look in mirrors anymore. Story 5. The Roommate Who Wasn't There. I always thought living alone would be peaceful, until I realized I wasn't truly alone. It started small. A cupboard left open, a light I was sure I'd turned off still glowing when I came home. At first, I chalked it up to forgetfulness. After all, adjusting to life alone in my tiny studio apartment was new for me. But then, one night, I came home to find every cupboard in the kitchen wide open. I stood frozen in the doorway, my keys dangling in my hand. My chest tightened as I scanned the room, but nothing else seemed out of place. Dishes were stacked neatly in the sink. The fridge was closed and there was no sign of forced entry. Still, the sight of those gaping cupboards sent a shiver down my spine. I closed them one by one, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of my own tired mind. But deep down, I felt the first tendrils of unease creeping in. That night, I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding for no reason I could explain. My room was bathed in darkness, save for the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the blinds. I glanced at the clock. 3:12 a.m. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, just a soft creak of the floorboards, but they were unmistakable. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to listen. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate step, as if someone was pacing just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, my mind racing. The apartment wasn't big, just one room with an attached kitchen and bathroom. There shouldn't have been anywhere for someone to hide. Another step, closer this time. I wanted to grab my phone, to call someone, anyone, but I was paralyzed with fear. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, the door to my bedroom creaked open. My stomach dropped. I stared at the door, half expecting to see a figure standing there, but the doorway was empty. Slowly, I forced myself to sit up, my breath shallow and uneven. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I stayed awake the rest of the night, every creak and groan of the apartment setting my nerves on edge. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But the unease lingered, a gnawing feeling that I wasn't alone. Over the next few days, the incidents escalated. I would find objects moved from their usual spots. My keys on the bathroom counter, a chair pulled out from the table. One morning, I woke up to find a trail of wet footprints leading from the kitchen to the bathroom. The air in the apartment began to feel heavy, oppressive, as if I were constantly being watched. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone or something else there with me. Then came the night I couldn't ignore it any longer. I woke up to the sound of breathing. It was faint at first, a soft, steady rhythm, but as I lay there, it grew louder, more distinct. My chest tightened as I realized it wasn't my own. The sound was coming from the foot of my bed. I didn't dare move, didn't even blink, as I strained to see through the darkness. And then I saw it. A figure was standing there, tall and thin, its head tilted slightly as if observing me. The shadows obscured most of its features, but I could make out the glint of eyes, cold, unblinking, and fixed on me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. It just stood there, its presence filling the room with an unbearable weight. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would disappear, that I'd wake up and find it was all just a nightmare. But when I opened them, the figure was closer. It was at the side of my bed now, leaning over me. I could feel its icy breath against my face, and the stench of decay filled my nostrils. My heart raced as I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned in closer, its lips curling into a grotesque smile. "You can't get rid of me," it whispered, its voice low and guttural. My vision blurred as tears streamed down my face. I squeezed my eyes shut again, and this time, when I opened them, the figure was gone. The next morning, I found scratches on the wall near the foot of my bed, long, jagged marks that hadn't been there before. My body ached, as if I'd been running a marathon, and I noticed faint bruises on my arms, as if someone had grabbed me in the night. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed a bag and left, crashing on a friend's couch while I figured out what to do. But the thing followed me. The first night at my friend's place, I woke up to find my suitcase open and my clothes scattered across the floor. My friend swore they hadn't touched it. The next night, I saw the figure again, standing in the corner of the room, watching me with those cold, unblinking eyes. "You can't leave me," it said, its voice echoing in my ears. "No matter where I go, it finds me. I don't know what it is or why it's attached to me, but I know one thing for sure: it's never going to let me go."